Okay, so I know that in the previous episode, we were going to build my moon probe, my new moon science vessel, and then go and obviously come back and gain a ton of science. But some things have changed, and I've changed my mind on some things. So the way that I'm going to be changing the series from here on out is I'm not going to show you the builds anymore, because I realized there were a couple episodes that were pretty much all building and no actual flying, which isn't fun. So there'll be less of that, obviously, and more actual progress, which is really good. And instead, most of my builds I will do in my other games to make sure they work, to make sure that they function properly, and then I'll just import the build and make it work for this series. Now, what you will see is you still see the structure of the craft and everything. I'll show you in the build mode, like what each thing is and how it works and functions, but for the most part, you won't see me build the entire thing anymore. So there's that. Second thing is I updated a couple mods, so we have some new stuff, and we're not going to use some stuff, so I'm going to show you in here. First thing that I got are these airbags. So I tried them out. They're kind of fun. They're hilarious to use. If you know anything about the Mars lander, you know that it used giant airbags to slow down its descent by pretty much bouncing off the ground, and it did a pretty good job of doing so and protecting it. I installed this. They don't work quite the same, but they are funny to use. So we may use those in the future, so I put them in. Obviously, my mod list still isn't final. I swear I'll get that to you guys when it's done. The other thing is that the modular colonization system got updated, and they added carbonite by default in it. Now, carbonite is like a resource system where you can drill for something called carbonite, where you can collect it in space and in the air and stuff. And it allows you to basically produce fuel, which allows you to use carbonite as fuel. And then, you know, say you use like a lander that lands on the moon, drills for carbonite, fills its tanks, and then just constantly is kind of repeating that process until it decides to go back. I feel like that's a little cheaty, although it does make sense from a logical standpoint. But we don't have that capability yet, I feel like, in the series, so I'm gonna keep it out. So all these parts here are all carbonite parts. I'm gonna try avoiding using them at the moment until I figure out whether I want to use this mod or not to begin with. Like I said, it came packaged with the modular colonization system, which, by the way, is the most complicated mod I have ever used. I just recently started digging into that, and I swear I've spent a good hour and a half just reading through their like giant manual of stuff that they have, because they have so many freaking parts to that thing. And it's a good way to be. Like, it's good that it is that complicated, because it gives us something to do when we get to the part where we're pretty much done with the tech tree, right? And now that I'm starting to work with it, I have some really cool ideas. But with all of that, I don't think there's anything else that I really needed to mention. Like I said, that if you see these numbers here on stuff that we already have, it just means it's the carbonite stuff. Not going to use that. We have the new airbags, and for the most part, you're not going to see me building anything anymore. But you will see some stuff that I have built. So whatever mission we're going on, I'll show you what we're going to use. Now, we need slightly more science to be able to do a proper science vessel that lands in multiple biomes on the moon and on Minmus, retrieves a ton of science, and comes back with it. The problem with that is we just don't have some parts that we really need. So I have devised a new space probe. This is the Buzz space probe. It's its official name. It's because it's going to buzz by Minmus and come back. It's designed specifically for this task. Now, it starts with a typical bottom stage. You have the main massive rocket at the bottom. This is just a normal Rocco Max. It's not the mainsail. It's the skipper. And then you have these 3 giant boosters. They have all their little struts and things. We've got our launch struts, and we got some wings on it. Those are pretty much to stabilize it during launch. Then we have just an additional fuel tank for this, so giving a bit extra fuel so we can get a bit more oomph out of it. If we take the fairings away, we have our structure underneath here. So this just is the 2.5 meter or millimeter, whatever it is, the 2.5 base is what it is. You can see, because I've put it up to 2.5. And then we have a typical, because we don't have the big decoupler jet. That's what we need for the the major science vessel. So we're using a little one there attached to that. And then this is all strutted out properly. Now there's struts attached to the fairing itself. I've learned that is a little technique that you can use. It's a pretty cool technique, actually. I gotta adjust this and I'll show you how that works. Then we have just a small stage here with a small engine to get us to Minmus. We have a small stage there for maneuvering. We have landing gear. We have all the science stuff that we can take with us. A ton of batteries in the center there with the couplers holding on the Science Juniors. And then we just have a probe body. So it should function quite well. If we go back to... I'm just going to drag that out. Back to aerodynamic, I'm going to put the cone fairing back on. I have 4 of them this time. I increased the nodes to 4. So let me show you. If you put your camera on the inside here, you'll see these struts. So you can actually set the struts up. And that's on a 3. I want this as 4. Okay. So there we go. And then you can kind of... Whoops, I'm going... No, I want to go this way. Thank you. It wasn't letting me go the other direction no matter how I scrolled my scroll wheel. So what we'll do is we'll attach struts like that. And it does, believe it or not, stabilize it on the inside a bit more. So that's a little trick that I've learned since last time. I also have struts up here kind of doing the same thing, but then again, they're also giving me issues with the scrolling. So that and that. You'll see the little things pop out on the outside, but oh well. It doesn't really make too much of a difference. The last thing I want to do is just make sure my staging is correct, and this is the only thing that I need to pull back down because everything else was set up properly. All right, so let's launch the Buzz. Going to be a night launch, and the thing that we got to keep in mind with Minmus is we got to change our plane. So we got to make a plane change so that we're in the same plane as Minmus, so it makes it easier to get there and back. That'll be something that we consider as we fly up. Also, one other thing that I've learned is if you hit caps lock, if you look down the bottom left here, these little arrows, they'll change to blue. That means it's under like precision driving, right? So it'll move little amounts, it'll make it smoother. Now you can use that for spacecraft up in space and all that, but I use it specifically for satellites once we actually get those up and running. And gonna decouple. There we go. This thing actually doesn't have as much oomph as our other launch did, but it is still quite fun to use. Because while it doesn't have as much oomph, on initial getaway, you still get quite a bit of power out of this one stage here, which is what we're focusing on now. We're just gotta get our orbit, which is something that we've seen plenty of times now, so we're just gonna skip over most of this. So let's talk a little bit about kind of how this works within the story. So Jebediah comes back from the moon, he gathers a ton of science, and they say basically, okay, that's really good, but we've only really seen one part of the moon. We want to see more. The moon is really intriguing to us, and what you've brought back makes us very interested in what else is there. So they're planning on making an even more efficient lander with more science stuff, and the idea is to bring back as much as he can from different spots. This time they're going to have a different pilot go up because Jebediah is now working on the X-302, or actually what we call the X-203. So the some of you spotted that reference last time I mentioned it. The F-302 is a fighter from Stargate. We have something very similar called the X-203. Now the X-203 is obviously an explorer. That's what the X stands for. The F in the Stargate one is a fighter, right? We have no reason to have weapons at the moment, so we just don't have any. So we have an exploring craft that is pretty similar in shape and functionality, and it's designed to go up into orbit of the planet, go to space stations that we're going to be ended up having. We got to plan ahead. We got to have vessels to get us to those space stations, right? And then from there, we want to land back on the planet. We want to save all those parts. We want this to be a reusable craft, and that's the X-203 project. There was an X-201 and an X-202, but let's just say that those weren't necessarily as efficient as we could have hoped for. In fact, the X202, not the X201, that was really experimental. The X202 is being refitted as a planetary craft, so it'll stay on our planet, on Kerbal, and it'll get us from point A to point B anytime we need to go to a different spot on the planet, which should make plenty of sense to any of you who kind of have an idea of what we want to do on Kerbal eventually as we continue exploring our own planet. Right now, I'm just circularizing, I suck with that word, this orbit, and then we're going to make our plane change. Plane changes can be a bit awkward here, so we're going to zoom out. Now, as you can tell, Minmus is quite a ways away, and the plane goes like this. So here's the best way to determine how to do this, just for anyone who wants to eyeball it. You see this line here? If this line here is instead directly across like this, then you're pretty much on the same plane as Minmus, right? So you could do it several different ways. The easiest way is just to kind of put a node like that, and that is the correct direction? Question mark? There we go. Okay, so you see the line moving? We need to get it somehow to, and it's probably going to require me to do a lot of adjusting here. So, okay, that is getting close, but not quite. I think that's about as good as I can hope for. That's pretty much it right there. Okay, so I just basically moved it a little bit from where it was, and we only have a 283 second or meter per second burn right there, so it's not bad at all. But usually this means I'll have to either point straight up or straight down, so we got to figure out which direction that's going to be. And I don't have enhanced nav ball installed because it keeps giving me issues, but for the most part, if you have that, or when the game gets updated to 2.5, you'll have that functionality anyways, where it kind of shows you where the maneuver nodes are on the side of the nav ball, so you kind of know which direction to go. It's probably also important to note that now that Jebediah is back and they're going over all that data from our moon mission, and they're kind of figuring out how to design a more efficient moon lander, they're sending this mission up in the meantime. They were already going to do a Minmus probe mission, much like they did to the moon, to kind of get some data on it. But you gotta realize that this is also bringing us back data for that moonlander, because the moonlander that we're using for the moon will eventually be retrofitted and repurposed for Minmus. Minmus has a much lower gravity, or so we're going to figure out here in a minute, and will therefore give us a bit easier of a time. So whatever we end up using on the moon, the more efficient it is, the even better it will be for Minmus. So it is a little bit of a trade-off that we're going with there, but I think it'll make a lot of sense to all of our poor Kerbals when they finally get to Minmus, and they're like, oh, this is like a dream to fly. It's like flying a Cadillac compared to the giant semi-truck we felt like we were flying before. It just didn't want to slow down as quickly as I wanted it to in some cases. I think this is about as good as we're going to get. So let's start making our maneuver. Now, it takes a while to get out to Minmus, right? So we can't just point in the general direction of Minmus and hope for the best, because it's actually quite far out there, and the amount of time that it takes for us to get to that point is a lot longer than a lot of people realize. So we're going to move much further down its path here, and we just want to fly by. We don't want to be super close, but we also don't want to be super far away. Let's adjust this node until we have it just right, but that definitely seems like the area of which we want to intersect. I think that's pretty good. Our periapsis, if we do this correctly, will be 433,000. We can obviously adjust that once we get there. This may even be a good test on getting an orbit. I'm pretty sure with the amount of power that we have behind us, we can actually get into a steady orbit around Minmus if we wanted to. We have 3 science juniors. We could use one on the way there or on the way back. we can use one in high orbit and in low orbit. So it'll be interesting to see how much science we're getting for each of those to kind of determine which one we're actually going to go with. So, you know, what's kind of strange to think about is we have a window in order to get to min-miss, right? We're trying to hit it at a certain point, and you got to get your plane right on it and everything. But coming back is a lot easier because it doesn't matter if you're going horizontally or vertically, you know, around Kerbin. If you're coming in at the angle that this outgoing maneuver node is, or if you're coming in directly on top, so like as a circle like this, it doesn't really matter that much in comparison to when you're actually going to min-miss, especially as like a lander to the moon, a lander to min-miss, that kind of stuff. You want to land typically on a horizontal plane and not a vertical plane, but that just is, so it makes it easier to, you know, do other maneuvers if you need to, such as if I wanted to land on the moon, I would land on a horizontal plane so I can keep getting to different biomes before heading back to Kerbin. But if I wanted to hit up all the polar ones, then wow, I overshot that a bit. I'm gonna have to slow down. Then you want to kind of flip her around, right? You wanna go vertical, so you hit all the polar planes. You hit like the North Pole and the South Pole of the moon, and then you land on the vertical polar plane of Kerbin. So it's interesting how that all works, but typically when you plan for things, you plan for a horizontal, you know, like left to right as opposed to north to south, east to west. So right now, I don't care how we go around min-miss because I'm not landing on it. However, with that, wow, I just made a full circle. With that being said, the one thing I do care about with this is when I decide to come back, as long as I get an intercept with Kerbin, then I'm fine. That's the only thing I care about. I don't care if I land on the North Pole, the South Pole, or in one of the many oceans, because I'm prepared for that. I prepared my probe to be ready to potentially land in the water and break apart. But that's not going to happen, right? Nothing ever goes wrong when we do these kind of missions. So I just want to tap the throttle a tiny bit. It'll make a big difference. There we go. And our periapsis is... oh, pretty close. That'll be good enough for now. Do a quick save, and then we will speed up time and get to min-miss. Now, if we were doing a manned mission, one thing to keep in mind is the fact that you need enough supplies to get out here. We are going super fast. Like, look at the time. It's flying at the moment. There's a good chance that you could spend several days in space before you ever get to min-miss if you really have a bad maneuver. The other thing to think about is you'll typically spend a couple days on the planet doing your little maneuvers, jumping back and forth, going to different... like, we've already been in space 4 days. So when you're going out to these moons and stuff, make sure you're bringing enough life support with you. If you're using TAC life support, otherwise your Kerbals are literally just going to die out in space because, you know, you didn't give them enough food and water. Stuff to consider. Also, we're moving really slow in comparison to our orbit. We're only moving at like 50 meters a second there. And here comes our intercept, which is going to be great because now... perfect. So how do I want to do this? I could... Let's see about doing a quick maneuver here. Actually, can we... We have so much fuel. I think we should just go for a full-on orbit. Why not? Why not get our probe into orbit? At this point, the guys back in the Space Center are like, we have so much fuel. Look, I'm still on this part of my staging here. This is an incredibly efficient design because the probe itself is so light. Because of that, we could pretty much orbit. We could circularize our orbit with this one stage, switch to the other stage, get in close, get the science that we need to get, and then go back. We could almost have done a lander, a probe lander.